welcome to the History News Show. Here's the hosts, John and Morgan.
Today we're going to be talking about how history repeats itself. Do you wish to start off with Vietnam and Korea?
The Vietnam and Korean conflicts were both fought during the Cold War. The Vietnam War was a devastating war between the South Vietnam fighting for capitalism against North Vietnam fighting for communism. The Korean War was fought between the North and the South and Korea, and similar to Vietnam, the North was fighting for communism and the South was fighting for capitalism. The Americans helped both South countries because they did not want communism to spread, also to keep their containment policy. When the northern countries were aided by the USSR and China, the countries at the start were both divided by parallels, Vietnam the 17th parallel and Korea the 38th parallel. Both of these wars were fought on limited conventional weapons only. This means no nuclear weapons. The wars did not end differently. The wars did end differently. Korea was able to set a country border that has been stably set, but North Vietnam and South Vietnam have become one country.
Don't forget about Napoleon and Hitler. How about you tell us about it, Morgan?
The two most known dictators of all time, Adolf Hitler and Napoleon Bonaparte, really show that history repeats itself. Hitler was the dictator of Nazi Germany. He took over land in other countries during World War II, the war he started. Most of his country's deaths were caused by Russia. When he controlled Germany, he killed millions of people, including his own citizens and troops. He created Hitler's Youth, a group for the children to join and gain skills so when they were teens they can join the army. Hitler also used propaganda to gain his power. Napoleon Bonaparte was the dictator and emperor of France. He overtook land during the French Revolution, and like Hitler, most of his country's deaths were caused by Russia. Napoleon was the general of France and murdered millions of his troops. He also used the youth to fill his army. He used propaganda when he gained control, which Hitler then copied. Hitler and Napoleon really show how history repeats itself.
In both the American Civil War and the Chinese Civil War, the two countries were divided north against the south, and in both conflicts the north would be victorious over the south. This was partly due to the fact that in both countries the north was more industrialized than the southern half of the country. In the north, both countries also had better military and more public support. In this American Civil War, they fought over states' rights. In this Chinese Civil War, they fought over whether to have a communist or nationalist government.
Now, how about colonialism and imperialism? Wish to explain?
Imperialism was used by many countries, including Germany, Britain, and France. Britain used imperialism on many countries. For example, Britain imperialized South Africa for their resources, location, and their climate is relatively the same as Europe, so they can grow the same crops to make more money. Britain also imperialized China, Egypt, Austria, and etc. France was another country that used imperialism. They imperialized Algeria, Mali, and Indochina. They both imperialized India, and they both used each country for their resources.
The Age of Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, and the Post-War Revolution were all times of social, technological, scientific, and political change. Preceding all three revolutions, the economies of all countries involved were thriving, which allowed these ideas to grow. From the social standpoint of the three revolutions during the Enlightenment, women hosted parties called salons that let the ideas of the Enlightenment spread as people met and discussed these new ideas. Women also began challenging the traditional ideas that only men were capable of accomplishing anything. Writers such as Mary Astell and Mary Wollstonecraft wrote books that challenged these views. Women also began taking on more roles in society, as demonstrated by Catherine the Great, who was the first female leader of Russia. During the Industrial Revolution, tensions between the working, middle, and upper class grew, causing many changes to society and the way people lived their lives. And during the post-war revolution, women's rights movements earned women the right to vote. It also let women pursue any career path they chose to. Several art movements during this post-war revolution, called Surrealism and Cubism, also occurred during this time period. The arts were also changed during this time period as well. Existentialism and jazz affected the times. Soon after this era, the Prohibition era also came into effect. From the technological aspect of the revolutions, during the Enlightenment, many new technologies had been developed. Copernicus published the heliocentric theory. Vesalius published the Human Anatomy textbook. Janssen invents the microscope. Kepler published the first two laws of planetary motion. Harvey would reveal how the human heart functions. Torricelli invents the barometer. England would establish the Royal Society to support scientific study. France established the Academy of Science. Newton published his laws of gravity, and Fahrenheit and Celsius invent the mercury thermometer. During the Industrial Revolution, Watt will invent the steam engine. Vanderbilt will construct a huge railroad system spanning the country. Rockefeller will create his oil and kerosene empire. Andrew Carnegie will develop the steel mills in Pittsburgh and become the richest man in the world. Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla will harness the power of electricity and install electric lighting across the country. And J.P. Morgan will buy Carnegie Steel and Edison Electric and turn them into U.S. Steel and General Electric. In the post-war revolution, Einstein will publish the theory of relativity and begin working on the atomic bomb. Sigmund Freud published the ideas of Freudian psychology, and Marie Curie and her husband discovered radiation and different radioactive elements. From the political standpoint during the Enlightenment, Hobbes will publish the social contract. John Locke will publish the natural human rights. Voltaire will use satire to mock the governments of many nations and express his views on government. Rousseau encourages individual freedom. Many monarchs will embrace the teachings of the Enlightenment and become known as the enlightened despots. The Enlightenment also played a large role in influencing the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. During the Industrial Revolution, the political policies of capitalism and socialism were developed, and during the post-war revolution, women gaining the right to vote will have a massive effect on the government.
There was also the fall of communism in Russia and China. John, wish to explain it?
The fall of communism in both Russia and China were very similar in many ways. First off, across both countries, the citizens began calling for democratic reforms. Also, several reformist leaders gained power in the countries. New policies like glasnost, perestroika, and the four modernizations moved the countries towards democracy. During brief periods of martial law, the citizens stood up for themselves when in Russia they defended the parliament, and in China they protested in Tiananmen Square.
World War I and World War II are two of the best-known wars in history. The funny thing is, they are very similar in the way they were caused. Both wars started with all groups having strong nationalism. Nationalism is the patriotic feeling, principle, or effort in support of your nation. Nations also had militarism, which is the principle or policy of maintaining a large military establishment. Alliances between the nations also caused both wars. In World War I, there was an alliance between Britain, France, and Russia against the alliance of Germany and Austria-Hungary. In World War II, there was the Axis powers and Allies. The Axis powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Japan, and the Allies were France, Great Britain, and Russia. America joined the alliances of Britain and France and Russia in both wars.
In the middle of World War I and World War II were similar also. In both wars, the U.S. wanted to stay neutral but failed to do so. In World War I, they became aware of what Germany was doing, and in World War II, they joined after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. The alliances made both wars much larger than they should have been. If they would not have had alliances, it would not have been considered a world war. Germany and its allies made the first attack in both of these wars. Both wars made extreme casualties to all nations, and also a large genocide happened in both wars. In World War I, the Ottomans committed a genocide of Armenians, and in World War II, a large genocide of Jews and other small groups of people were killed by the Nazi Germany Party. Also, tanks, planes, artillery, and submarines were the most used weapons in this war than in any other before it. Also, France lost part of its land in World War I and all of it in World War II. Also, some parts of the wars were fought in Africa. Lastly, Germany used submarines to attack American vessels in both wars.
The effects of these wars were also similar. Both wars caused wars after it. World War I caused World War II, and World War II caused the Cold War. Also, Germany was totally destroyed by both wars. This caused World War II. Because the Germans had many grudges against many of the Allied forces and held them responsible for Germany's economic state, the Russians also had the most casualties of all the nations involved in both of the wars. The economic problems also arose because of the effects of the wars. At the end of both wars, Germany lost land in World War I and was divided into two halves, East and West Germany, after World War II.